aging. Aging is the subject of this next cluster of speakers, and aging, it turns out, is a very new thing. Until not too long ago, life really was nasty and brutish and short. And in a world where disease and famine and violence lurked literally at every turn, hitting 45 was a really big deal. So in 1900, life expectancy was about 45, the part of the world that we recognize as the West. And then things began to change, and today for women, life expectancy is approaching the mid-80s. Now, that's an astonishing thing. That used to take 1,000 years of human history. We've gained about 20 or 25 years in the last 50. And the question arises, is it good news or is it bad news? Now, an organization that I started a little while ago called Zoomer Media, together with an advocacy organization called CARP, think this is good news. We're on the optimist side of this discussion, but it is true that there are many on the pessimist side of this discussion, and they have many good reasons for being pessimistic, among them some of the talks you've heard recently, even this morning, as Jeffrey very diligently and accurately talked about rising health costs. So our next speaker, Ted Fishman, has written this really outstanding book. It's called The Shock of the Gray. And while I don't think he lines up with the pessimists completely in terms of the substance of what he says, the cover puts it this way: the aging of the world's population, how it pits young against old, child against parent, worker against boss, company against rival, and nation against nation. Got any good news, Ted?
Thank you, Moses. Thanks for reading the whole title. I had wanted to call the book "The World is Flatulent," but my publisher wouldn't let me. So shock of gray, I would kill for a shock of gray. Paul Bloom, when he started speaking the first day, I don't know if he's still here, he said that we think that the people we like are more attractive, and as we like them over time, they'll be more attractive. So I feel obliged to pander to you all. I started at this conference seeing just a bunch of pasty-faced intellectuals, their heads in their books, and now, my, what brains. Just gorgeous. It's like being on the set of Mad Men. What is the shock of gray? I'm not a pessimist. I am an optimist. I think the main thing that we have to understand about a shock of gray, and whenever we're talking about aging, is that, number one, we are talking about this incredible treasure that most of humanity has not had. Moses just talked about it. 7,000 generations of humankind basically lived the same amount of years as all those other 7,000 generations. And only since the 1890s, statistically, as the human lifespan started to go up. It even took more than 100 years of the Industrial Revolution for us to get us there. And we're fearful of this. It's a new moment in human existence. The thing I'm for most of all is for us to see this moment. Ever since people have been mixing herbs in bowls or talking to spirits and trees, we have wanted this treasure. Alchemists were after this treasure. We have used the sum of our intelligence to get us here. It's scary to be here, but we have the intelligence to make the most of it, and that's what I'm for. And if one thing ideacity does above all, it gives us optimism about this intelligence. And maybe that's why you all look so beautiful to me. What is the shock of gray? Well, I was thinking about this for every speaker, because I've been on this project for several years now. It comes out of another project that I was on for quite a few years before that. And so forgive me, every speaker that came up here, I started thinking about their experience through the lens of shock of gray. So even the singer who came out to start us, Matt Ehrlich, who began with that beautiful "O Canada" and then the solo from Billy Elliot, I was thinking, what is the shock of gray to him? And I was thinking, it's the Wednesday matinee. And you could see the demographic change in the audience in that Wednesday matinee. It's the grandmas and the grandpas bringing their children there, but they're bringing fewer grandchildren than they were bringing 20 years ago. The number of grandchildren in North America has shrunk dramatically per family because family size has shrunk dramatically. And that's one manifestation of the shock of gray. And then Matt Ridley, the irrational optimist, I was thinking, where does he see the shock of gray? And I think he sees it on the clock of the wall. He mentioned that, for every year we get an extra 3 months of life. And I love that. That means I'm going to talk to you for 17 minutes, and I'm going to give you an extra 4.5 minutes of life. You're welcome. And what can you do with those 4.5 minutes of life? Well, you can hear Cameron Carpenter give us his beautiful rendition of Bizet, which lasts about 4.5 minutes on his CD. You could see a really smart New Caledonian crow craft a new hook. That's a revelation. I loved that. And you could drink a probiotic yogurt drink in 4.5 minutes. I think they've really made progress on these yogurt drinks because now they make you live longer. My dad in the 60s saw the commercials where these 120-year-old Russians were drinking yogurt drinks, and he went into his room, drank the drink. He came out complaining about the Tsar and how Chekhov was a putz. And he became a 120-year-old Russian. That is the wrong direction to go with those yogurt drinks. And then Deepak Chopra said that we are about to face an epidemic of unparalleled scale of diseases unfolding in humankind. Well, there's another side to that. Diseases will be more plentiful because we're living longer. We'll get sick, and we'll get well, and we'll get sick again, and we'll get well. And this is part of the treasure that we have, and one reason why both we are living longer and having smaller families. And then I was thinking, well, what about through the eyes of Jay Jayawardena and through Jamie Matthews' eyes? And they were telling us about finding planets that are 1/billionth the luminosity of the stars that they are near, and they're hard to find. And I was thinking, well, my whole book is about seeing the invisible omnipresent. How do you see the changing demographic of the world when you just look out your window? If planets transit across stars, what about the people who are crossing in front of your window? Do you see how the aging of the world is changing them? And it is changing. It's changing all of us. It's changing how we think about ourselves is throughout our lifetimes. We are just about the most durable thing that we deal with in our lifetimes, at least in a social context. We outlive Fortune 500 companies. Our lifespan is significantly longer than the average large company. IBM just celebrated its 100th anniversary, and the comment about that was how very rare that was for a company to reach 100 years, particularly in North America. We outlive governments. If you count back from what Moses told you was the average lifespan of a woman today, 83, some places 84 years old, very few of the governments around the world had the shape and form that they have today, 83 years ago. If you do 2 lifespans ago, there wasn't, many of the European states didn't even exist yet. They were principalities and they had to be cobbled together. We are more durable than any of the institutions that we face. And if you ask a young person, at least in the United States, what do they count on government for? They count on it for its ephemeral nature and the ephemeral nature of its promises. So when you think about this lifespan, this expanded lifespan, you have to be thinking about a world which is dramatically different for you because you are outlasting. You are living a life that none of the institutions that we deal with expected you to live. Now, there's another thing about living longer. If you took the 7 billion people who live today and you moved them back in time 300 years, and you match the life expectancy we have now with the life expectancy people used to have, Our cohort of people on the planet now lives about 280 billion more years than we would have lived if we were 7 billion people 300 years ago. 280 billion years. You start to think, well, we need another planet for that. Well, Ray and Jamie are providing that. They found one. 55 Cancri A. Now, was that named in Canada, 55 Cancri A? But that's really good news. But I think for Americans, you have to rename it to 55 Cancri fucking A. Let's talk about how we age. Moses mentioned, that there is this vast expansion of lifespan. And how did this happen? Well, a lot of us think it's because of medicine, because people are living better, because we're exercising better. That has something to do with it. But when you think about what used to kill people, anybody here been to the doctor lately and filled that long form about whether you've ever been bitten by a flea, had a toothache, had a backache, had an earache, had, a septic sore? Those were all things, that long, long list, which are petty annoyances today, were deadly occurrences in the past. So it used to be, Guy Brown, who's a scholar at Cambridge who uses this metaphor I really like, he says that life used to be on an on-off switch. We were bounding around pretty happy. 10% of the people died before age 1, 10% of the people died before age 10. Pretty healthy until you're 40. When you're 40, lots of things started happening, and it's very hard to get past a life expectancy of 40 for most of human history. You'd step on a rock, you'd get a septic sore, you'd drop over. We were accustomed to people who we were close with, who seemed healthy to us, being healthy one day and dead 4 days later. That was the typical cycle. Healthy one day, dead 4 days later. Now, he says, life is on a dimmer switch. Dimmer switch you could turn up, you could turn down, you could turn up and down, you could play with it. Once you get past, we're pretty healthy until 60. A lot of people are really healthy till 75, but that dimmer switch kind of it keeps going towards that dimmer realm. And that's the world we're living in. And one thing about an older world is that it is a far more diverse world than we're used to. So if you think about what 20-year-olds are like, they're a lot like each other in terms of their health and cognition. When you think about 40-year-olds or 50-year-olds, they're a lot like each other in health and cognition. But when you think about after 60, we start to verge. We start to diverge. And our life consequences change quite radically from our peers. So about 30% of the people, serious things start happening to them in 60. And then lots of people are really robust till 80, 85. And then when you get to 80, 85, you have a 50% chance of having dementia, a serious form of dementia, mostly Alzheimer's. And this is a world in which cookie-cutter solutions do not work, in which we have to see the diversity of that older world. So when we talk about who should work, who should retire, who should get benefits, who should be provided for health, it is not a single kind of person that we're talking about. It is every kind of person that is in the fabric of humanity. But, this is a conference about ideas about sex and cerebral procreation. And one of the great things about this great expanded life period is that we can procreate through the productivity and imagination of people who live longer and longer. And that is the great challenge of an aging society, is how do we give the gift of productivity, of usefulness to ourselves into a period in which we are commonly considered as going too rapidly on that dimmer switch, which is really, for many of us, moving rather slowly. Another, aspect about longevity, which I think people misunderstand, is that public health is so much more important than the kind of medicine you get as an individual. It is really public health that provides the great expansion of the human lifespan. So the greatest thing you can do for yourself to live long is just to be born now, in an era where you can turn on clean water, have relatively clean air, won't get hit by a trolley bus. In Chicago, when we had streetcars before they were eliminated, 4 people a day were killed by the buses. When you have, in Canada, a program, unlike the United States, where you regulate handguns. That is a public health initiative, which is life-saving. All of these accumulate, and they create this great public benefit. Now, one of the most powerful implements of public health is literacy. Diane Reese talked to you the other day about how science is unbounded by borders. The most global product in the world is health information. As soon as it's available everywhere. And it moves rather quickly around the world. And it could be basic information. And the correlation between high literacy and good health is so high that even in the poorest countries where you make a literacy effort for young mothers, the infant mortality of their children goes way down. And think about it. Health information is just everywhere. It's not just the brochures you get from your doctor. It's everything. A gum wrapper, a sign that says mind the gap when you get on the subway. That saves lives. And even being in proximity to literacy saves lives. So literacy programs are one of the big life-giving things. But that's how people age. How do places age? Places age when their birth rates go down. Everywhere in the world, with a few exceptions. Paul Singer told me that Israel was one of these exceptions, the only industrialized country with higher than replacement fertility, which really means it is the startup nation. But virtually everywhere else you go. How many people here, raise your hand if you have fewer siblings than your parents had siblings? Okay, that is a huge proportion of this crowd. That is the story of the world. Even in countries what we see as flush with youth, where youth are filling the squares in protest, those young people come from smaller families than their parents. And when places age, things change. What changes? Well, the workforce changes. So among the oldest places in the world are the developed countries, industrialized East Asia, Europe, the United States. This has had vast consequences for the workforce in these countries. What started this book, it came out of my last book called China Inc. I would go to China, see cities flush with young people, see foreign capital flooding in. About $2 trillion of foreign capital had come in to create urban industrial wonderlands in Chinese cities, and they had attracted around 200 million young people from the Chinese countryside to meet that money that was coming from aging economies. And I was wondering, was there a kind of vast age discrimination because in these older countries, developed countries, older workers were becoming newly vulnerable in the workforce? Unemployment is higher than it's ever been for the 50-plus worker in nearly all of the industrialized workplace. Work search times, if you lose your job, are very long, a year or more for this 50-plus group. And are they being made vulnerable because there is this kind of global shopping for young people who are unencumbered by the cost of age, unencumbered by the taxes that support an old population, unencumbered by the benefits, unencumbered outside Canada by the kinds of health benefits you have to pay on the shop floor for them? And it seems like it's true. When you walk into a Chinese factory, and I've been to hundreds of them, the single defining factor you see at those working benches is that those people are under 25. There's a company that makes iPods. They have 1.3 million employees, one company. How do you like to add that to the workforce of Canada? Virtually all of those workers are under 25. None of them have anything that we would think of as meaningful old age insurance or healthcare benefits. And this is what the world wants, and this is what some countries want. If you go to China, what you see is a kind of age apartheid, where the country has basically decided our road to the top is to segregate young from old. And they are triaging the welfare of older people out in the countryside, who are a vast ghetto of 800 million, mostly older people. Unless those older people come to the city and provide childcare for those young workers and take care of the kids. So when we employ them in our multinational companies or outsource jobs to them, we don't just get the low-wage, un-age-related expense wage of the young worker, we get the free labor of the parents too, who will not be hired in any other way and have to work their way back into the family. This changes the workforce utterly. It makes workers in the developed country vulnerable. So one of the places you see this foremost is in Japan. Japan is a rich country, has a high savings rate. It also has one of the highest rates of elder poverty of any industrialized country. Of the G8, it has the highest. And why is that? It's because Japanese people live long, they're under-pensioned. When they quit their jobs, when the men quit their jobs, they quit at age 60, they get a check, they go home, they sit, they languish, their wives don't like them around, they have nice names for them like rotten garbage and dirty leaves. And then a week later, their boss calls and says, how would you like to come back to your old job? And the worker says, I'd love it. And the boss says, yeah, come back, work for half the wage, you'll have all your old friends. And the person takes the job. Right now, the contingent workforce, for hire, hourly wage, temporal workforce, seasonal workforce, is now, for the first time, more than half of the global workforce. And a lot of that relates to the aging of the population. It changes everything. Let me sum up just this way. I have good news about smoked meat, the medium fat. I went to Spain. Spanish people live long. Everyone knows they have the Mediterranean diet. It's a lie. They eat more ham and more pork than any other country in the world except for Denmark. So why do they live so long if their diet is so fatty? Well, because they eat together. And you heard before in this conference how sociability makes you healthy. And if we live in a world where we look over our shoulder and the family is small, and we don't have family to take care of us, and government resources are pinched, we only have each other as family. And that sociability will keep us together, it will keep us healthy, and it will give us the optimism we need for an aging world. My time is up, yours is not. Thank you.
That was great. Very inventive, Ted.
Thank you.
Picking up the other speakers.
Thank you.
That's super. That's super. All right. Good.
Thank you,
Thanks
Moses.
a lot. Yeah.